The believer who said God is not in churches? Leo Tolstoy, God is not in churches. This seemingly heretical declaration, uttered by one of history's most profound spiritual seekers, Leo Tolstoy, invites us into a labyrinth of faith, doubt, and the very nature of divine presence. It's a statement that, on its surface, feels like a betrayal, a rejection of the sacred spaces that have, for centuries, housed our collective yearnings for transcendence. But to dismiss it as mere atheism or iconoclasm would be to misunderstand the seismic shift occurring within the soul of a man who, having grappled with the emptiness of societal convention and the suffocating dogma of organized religion, was embarking on a radical redefinition of what it means to believe. This script is not about debunking faith or criticizing institutions. It is about tracing the contours of a deeply personal spiritual revolution, one that resonates with anyone who has ever felt a disconnect between the prescribed rituals of belief and the raw, often messy, experience of encountering the divine in the everyday. We stand at a precipice, looking into the heart of a man who, in his relentless pursuit of truth, dared to question the very foundations of how humanity has sought to touch the infinite. Tolstoy's journey is a testament to the enduring human quest for authentic connection, a quest that often leads us away from the familiar sanctuaries and towards the unadorned wilderness of the self. What does it truly mean to seek God? Is it in the hushed reverence of stained glass and chanted prayers, or in the quiet contemplation of a peasant's toil, the shared meal of the destitute, or the solitary wrestling with one's own conscience? This exploration will not offer easy answers, but rather it will unfurl a complex tapestry of thought, inviting you to consider the possibility that the divine might be found not in the edifice we build to contain it, but in the very fabric of existence itself, in the unmediated encounter with life in all its raw, unfiltered glory. We will delve into the heart of Tolstoy's disillusionment, not to condemn, but to understand the genesis of his radical reorientation, a reorientation that stripped away the layers of tradition to reveal a more elemental, more profound understanding of faith. This is the story of a man who, in his search for God, found him not within the walls of a church, but in the very act of living in the unvarnished truth of the human condition. It is a journey that challenges our assumptions about where divinity resides and compels us to look anew at the world around us, and more importantly, within ourselves, for the sacred. Tolstoy's assertion that God is not in churches stems from a profound disillusionment with the formalism that had come to characterize much of religious practice. He observed how rituals, once intended as conduits to the divine, had ossified into mere social conventions or obligations, devoid of genuine spiritual vitality. For Tolstoy, the church, as an institution, often prioritized adherence to doctrine and tradition over the cultivation of inner spiritual truth. He saw a stark contrast between the outward display of piety, the ornate vestments, the prescribed prayers, the elaborate ceremonies, and the inner state of the worshiper. This disconnect led him to question whether these external structures truly facilitated a connection with God, or if they, in fact, served as barriers, obscuring the very essence of faith they purported to represent. His critique wasn't aimed at the sacredness of the idea of the church as a gathering place for believers, but rather at the institutionalization of faith, which he felt often led to spiritual complacency and a detachment from the transformative power of genuine belief. He was particularly troubled by the way religious authorities often wielded their power, enforcing rigid interpretations of Scripture and condemning those who deviated, a practice he found antithetical to the spirit of love and compassion that he believed was at the core of Christ's teachings. He saw how the emphasis on external observance could breed hypocrisy, allowing individuals to maintain a facade of righteousness while their inner lives remained untouched by divine grace. The pursuit of spiritual purity, for Tolstoy, was an intensely personal and often arduous journey, one that could be easily stifled by the weight of institutional demands and the pressure to conform. Furthermore, Tolstoy's critique was deeply informed by his own spiritual crisis and subsequent reawakening. Having initially found solace and meaning within the established Orthodox Church, he grew increasingly disturbed by what he perceived as the Church's complicity in the injustices and hypocrisies of the state. He witnessed how the Church often blessed the instruments of war, supported oppressive regimes, and seemed more concerned with its own temporal power and wealth than with the spiritual welfare of the common people. This realization was a turning point, prompting him to re-examine the foundational texts and teachings of Christianity, seeking a pure, more authentic expression of faith. He became convinced that the true message of Christ had been distorted and corrupted by centuries of institutionalization and the accumulation of dogma. He found greater resonance with the simple, direct teachings of Jesus, particularly those emphasizing love, forgiveness, and non-resistance to evil. For Tolstoy, faith was not about accepting a set of predetermined beliefs or participating in prescribed rituals. It was about an active, ongoing engagement with the divine within oneself and in the world. This engagement, he believed, required constant introspection, a willingness to question, and a commitment to living in accordance with one's conscience. The Church, in its current form, seemed to offer a shortcut, a way to outsource one's spiritual responsibility, and this was something Tolstoy could no longer abide. He was searching for a faith that was lived, not merely professed, a faith that permeated every aspect of one's existence, transforming not just the individual, but also this society in which they lived. His famous statement, therefore, was not a rejection of God, but a passionate plea for a more authentic lived spirituality, one that could not be confined within the walls of any earthly structure. Consider how this sentiment echoes in moments when we feel a profound sense of the sacred outside of traditional religious settings. Perhaps it's the quiet awe experienced during a walk in nature, the shared vulnerability in a moment of deep human connection, or the sudden clarity that arises from confronting a personal challenge. These experiences, often unmediated by institutional frameworks, can feel intensely spiritual, revealing a presence that transcends organized doctrine. Tolstoy's journey compels us to ask, are we seeking God in the external performances of faith, or are we cultivating the inner capacity to recognize the divine in the unadorned realities of life? He observed that the very institutions designed to foster spiritual growth could, paradoxically, become the primary obstacles to genuine spiritual experience, fostering a passive acceptance of dogma rather than active, personal quest for truth. His disillusionment was not with the divine itself, but with humanity's often misguided attempts to capture, control, and commodify it, thereby diminishing its boundless nature. Tolstoy's critique extends into the realm of what he perceived as the spiritual abdication inherent in institutionalized religion. He argued that by outsourcing the search for God to external authorities and prescribed rituals, individuals forfeited their personal responsibility for spiritual growth. This, in his view, fostered a passive faith, one that relied on the Church to provide salvation rather than actively cultivating it through lived experience and moral action. He saw this as a dangerous detachment from the core tenets of genuine spirituality, which he believed demanded constant self-examination and a commitment to ethical living. The Church, by offering a seemingly prepackaged path to the divine, inadvertently encouraged a form of spiritual consumerism, where faith became something to be acquired or consumed, rather than something to be actively built and nurtured from within. This led to a spiritual inertia, where the profound and often challenging work of self-transformation was sidestepped in favor of superficial adherence to external forms. Moreover, Tolstoy was deeply troubled by the Church's entanglement with worldly power and its consequent compromise of its spiritual mission. He observed how religious institutions often aligned themselves with the state, blessing wars, supporting oppressive social hierarchies, and accumulating wealth, all of which, in his eyes, corrupted the pure message of Christ. This alliance, he felt, created a profound hypocrisy, where the language of divine love and compassion was used to justify earthly violence and injustice. Consequently, the Church, rather than being a beacon of spiritual truth, often became an instrument of social control and a bulwark against genuine reform. For Tolstoy, the true spiritual path was one of radical simplicity, humility, and unwavering commitment to love and nonviolence, principles that seemed diametrically opposed to the institutional Church's embrace of power and its participation in the mechanisms of the state. He believed that the Church's worldly ambitions had diverted it from its essential purpose, to guide individuals towards a deeper understanding and experience of God through personal transformation and ethical conduct. Building on this, consider how Tolstoy's perspective highlights the potential for spiritual stagnation when faith becomes overly reliant on inherited traditions and communal pronouncements rather than individual conscience. He championed a form of Christianity that was deeply personal, rooted in the direct experience of love and the imperative to live a moral life, often aligning more closely with the teachings of early Christian ascetics or certain Eastern spiritual traditions than with the established Orthodox Church of his time. His own rigorous lifestyle, marked by simplicity, manual labor, and a profound empathy for the poor and oppressed, served as a living testament to this conviction. He saw the pursuit of wealth, status, and comfort as antithetical to the spiritual life, believing that true fulfillment lay in shedding material attachments and embracing a life of service and self-denial. This internal discipline, he argued, was the true Church, a sanctuary built not of stone and mortar, but of cultivated inner virtue and unwavering ethical commitment. Conversely, Tolstoy's rejection of churches was not a dismissal of the value of community in spiritual life. Rather, it was a redefinition of what constitutes a true spiritual community. He envisioned gatherings of individuals united not by rigid dogma or hierarchical structures, but by a shared commitment to love, truth, and mutual support in their individual spiritual journeys. Such communities, he believed, would be characterized by genuine fellowship, open dialogue, and a collective striving for moral perfection, free from the constraints of institutional power and the pressures of conformity. These would be spaces where the divine could be experienced through the authentic connection between souls, where individuals could inspire and challenge one another to live more fully in accordance with their highest spiritual ideals, unburdened by the weight of ecclesiastical pronouncements or the demands of institutional loyalty. His focus remained resolutely on the individual's direct, unmediated encounter with the divine, a process that he believed was best nurtured through personal reflection and the practice of love in all human interactions. Tolstoy's critique also delves into the inherent danger of spiritual inertia that arises when faith becomes overly dependent on inherited traditions and communal pronouncements, rather than on the cultivation of individual conscience. He championed a form of Christianity that was profoundly personal, rooted in the direct experience of love and the imperative to live a moral life, often aligning more closely with the teachings of early Christian ascetics or certain Eastern spiritual traditions and with the established Orthodox Church of his time. His own rigorous lifestyle, marked by simplicity, manual labor, and a profound empathy for the poor and oppressed, served as a living testament to this conviction. He saw the pursuit of wealth, status, and comfort as antithetical to the spiritual life, believing that true fulfillment lay in shedding material attachments and embracing a life of service and self-denial. This internal discipline, he argued, was the true church, a sanctuary built not of stone and mortar, but of cultivated inner virtue and unwavering ethical commitment. Furthermore, Tolstoy's disillusionment stemmed from a keen observation of how religious institutions often fostered a sense of spiritual entitlement, where adherence to doctrine and participation in rituals were seen as sufficient guarantees of salvation, irrespective of one's lived ethical conduct. He contrasted this with his own understanding of faith as a continuous, arduous process of moral self-improvement, a constant striving to embody divine principles in daily actions. This involved not merely believing, but doing, not simply attending services, but actively practicing compassion, forgiveness, and non-violence in all interactions. The church, in his view, could inadvertently create a spiritual complacency, a false sense of security that insulated individuals from the challenging work of genuine spiritual transformation. This led him to advocate for a faith that was demonstrably lived, a faith that manifested itself in tangible acts of kindness and justice, rather than in abstract theological assent or ceremonial observance. Building upon this, consider how Tolstoy's perspective highlights the potential for spiritual complacency when faith becomes overly reliant on inherited traditions and communal pronouncements, rather than on the cultivation of individual conscience. He championed a form of Christianity that was profoundly personal, rooted in the direct experience of love and the imperative to live a moral life, often aligning more closely with the teachings of early Christian ascents or certain Eastern spiritual traditions than with the established Orthodox Church of his time. His own rigorous lifestyle, marked by simplicity, manual labor, and a profound empathy for the poor and oppressed, served as a living testament to this conviction. He saw the pursuit of wealth, status, and comfort as antithetical to the spiritual life, believing that true fulfillment lay in shedding material attachments and embracing a life of service and self-denial. This internal discipline, he argued, was the true church, a sanctuary built not of stone and mortar, but of cultivated inner virtue and unwavering ethical commitment. Consequently, Tolstoy's critique extends into the realm of what he perceived as the spiritual abdication inherent in institutionalized religion. He argued that by outsourcing the search for God to external authorities and prescribed rituals, individuals forfeited their personal responsibility for spiritual growth. This, in his view, fostered a passive faith, one that relied on the church to provide salvation rather than actively cultivating it through lived experience and moral action. He saw this as a dangerous detachment from the core tenets of genuine spirituality, which he believed demanded constant self-examination and a commitment to ethical living. The church, by offering a seemingly prepackaged path to the divine, inadvertently encouraged a form of spiritual consumerism, where faith became something to be acquired or consumed, rather than something to be actively built and nurtured from within. Now, consider how this applies when you face moments of doubt regarding your own spiritual practices. Do you find yourself relying more on the form of your faith, attending services, reciting prayers, than on the substance of your spiritual life, which might involve acts of service or personal ethical reflection? Tolstoy's experience urges us to examine whether our religious observances are truly animating our lives with divine purpose, or if they have become mere habits, detached from the transformative power of genuine conviction and lived morality. He was not suggesting a solitary spiritual path, but rather a community built on shared ethical commitment, a stark contrast to the hierarchical and often power-laden structures he found so problematic. This emphasis on lived ethics, on the tangible manifestation of faith in action, was central to his redefinition of true spirituality. Tolstoy's rejection of the institutional church was also deeply rooted in his critique of what he saw as the church's tendency to infantilize believers, fostering a reliance on external authority rather than encouraging the development of independent spiritual discernment. He believed that true faith was an active, engaged process, one that required individuals to grapple with life's moral complexities and arrive at their own understanding of divine truth. The Church, by providing ready-made answers and demanding unquestioning obedience, could stifle this vital process, leaving individuals spiritually immature and ill-equipped to navigate the challenges of life. This intellectual and moral passivity, he argued, was a far greater danger than any theological heterodoxy. Furthermore, Tolstoy's understanding of authentic spiritual community diverged sharply from the vain, hierarchical structures prevalent in established churches. He envisioned genuine fellowship as a horizontal network of mutual support and shared striving, rather than a vertical system of command and obedience. In his ideal community, individuals would inspire and challenge one another to live more fully, in accordance with their highest moral and spiritual ideals, unburdened by the weight of ecclesiastical pronouncements or the demands of institutional loyalty. Such a community, he posited, would be characterized by transparency, accountability, and a collective commitment to truth and love, fostering an environment where spiritual growth could flourish organically. Consider how this applies when you observe the dynamics within your own social or religious circles. Do these groups encourage critical thinking and personal moral inquiry, or do they foster a passive acceptance of established norms and doctrines? Tolstoy's experience suggests that the most fertile ground for spiritual development is often found in spaces that prioritize authentic dialogue and the courage to question, rather than in those that demand rigid adherence and discourage dissent. He was not advocating for isolation, but for a redefinition of connection, one that valued genuine human encounter and shared ethical commitment over institutional affiliation. Another crucial layer to Tolstoy's position involves his profound emphasis on the ethical dimension of faith. For him, spirituality was inextricably linked to morality. The two were not separate spheres, but deeply intertwined aspects of a unified life. He believed that one's relationship with the divine was not truly expressed through prayer or ritual alone, but through the consistent application of love, compassion, and justice in all dealings with fellow human beings. The Church, in his observation, often seemed to prioritize doctrinal purity over ethical integrity, allowing individuals to profess belief while engaging in actions that contradicted the very essence of spiritual teaching. This disconnect was, for Tolstoy, a fundamental betrayal of faith. This perspective invites us to reflect on our own lives. How consistently do our actions align with the spiritual principles we profess? Do we compartmentalize our faith, reserving it for specific times and places, or do we strive to embody its essence in every interaction, every decision, every moment of our existence? Tolstoy's challenge is to recognize that the true church is not a building, but the lived experience of ethical engagement with the world, a continuous process of striving to bring divine love into tangible reality through our deeds. His critique was not an attack on belief itself, but a passionate defense of a faith that was lived, breathed, and enacted in the messy, beautiful, and often challenging arena of human life. This internal transformation, he believed, was the only true path to spiritual fulfillment. Tolstoy's critique, however, extended beyond mere institutional critique to a deeper examination of the very nature of spiritual authority itself. He was profoundly skeptical of any system that claimed exclusive access to divine truth or that appointed intermediaries between individuals and God. For Tolstoy, the spiritual realm was an intensely personal landscape, and any attempt by an external body to dictate one's relationship with the divine was an infringement upon spiritual autonomy. This led him to question the role of priests, bishops, and even the veneration of saints, seeing them not as guides, but as potential gatekeepers who could obscure the direct, unmediated experience of God. He believed that the spiritual journey was, at its core, a solitary endeavor, an internal wrestling match with one's own soul, and that institutions, by their very nature, tended to impose conformity, thereby stifling the unique spiritual development of each individual. The emphasis shifted from communal worship as a prescribed duty to the cultivation of a personal, internal sanctuary where one could directly commune with the divine. Moreover, Tolstoy's conviction that God is not in churches was fueled by his growing understanding of spiritual truth as being universally accessible, not confined to specific doctrines or sacred texts. He observed how different religious traditions, while often espousing similar core values of love and compassion, became rigid and exclusive through institutionalization, creating divisions and fostering intolerance. He felt that the true essence of spirituality transcended the boundaries of organized religion, residing instead in the inherent moral sense and the capacity for love that he believed were intrinsic to every human being. This universalist perspective meant that the divine could be encountered in any authentic human experience, regardless of its religious affiliation or lack thereof. Consider how this applies when you encounter someone from a vastly different faith, tradition, or no tradition at all, who embodies profound kindness and wisdom. Does your internal framework allow for the recognition of divine presence in that encounter, or do you find yourself seeking validation within your own established religious context? Tolstoy's journey urges us to consider whether our definitions of spiritual community might be too narrow, excluding the possibility that the divine manifests itself in myriad, unexpected forms, often outside the prescribed boundaries of religious institutions. His focus remained steadfastly on the inner life, the cultivation of one's own moral compass, and the direct experience of love as the primary indicators of spiritual progress, rather than adherence to external religious structures. Another crucial layer to Tolstoy's position involves his profound emphasis on the ethical dimension of faith. For him, spirituality was inextricably linked to morality. The two were not separate spheres, but deeply intertwined aspects of a unified life. He believed that one's relationship with the divine was not truly expressed through prayer or ritual alone, but through the consistent application of love, compassion, and justice in all dealings with fellow human beings. The Church, in his observation, often seemed to prioritize doctrinal purity over ethical integrity, allowing individuals to profess belief while engaging in actions that contradicted the very essence of spiritual teaching. This disconnect was, for Tolstoy, a fundamental betrayal of faith. This perspective invites us to reflect on our own lives. How consistently do our actions align with the spiritual principles we profess? Do we compartmentalize our faith, reserving it for specific times and places, or do we strive to embody its essence in every interaction, every decision, every moment of our existence? Tolstoy's challenge is to recognize that the true church is not a building, but the lived experience of ethical engagement with the world, a continuous process of striving to bring divine love into tangible reality through our deeds. His critique was not an attack on belief itself, but a passionate defense of a faith that was lived, breathed, and enacted in the messy, beautiful, and often challenging arena of human life. This internal transformation, he believed, was the only true path to spiritual fulfillment. Reflecting on this journey so far, we've traced the arc of a profound spiritual reorientation, moving from the perceived stillness of institutional sanctuaries to the vibrant, often unbidden, manifestations of the divine in lived experience. The quest for authentic connection, it seems, often leads us away from the familiar, towards a deeper engagement with the raw fabric of existence itself. As we stand on the threshold of concluding this exploration, consider how the very act of questioning the prescribed boundaries of faith can illuminate hidden dimensions of the sacred. The insights gleaned from Tolstoy's radical disaffection with the edifice of organized religion are not merely an indictment of past practices, but an invitation to a more expansive understanding of where divinity might reside. Perhaps not in the pronouncements of authority, but in the quiet dignity of human struggle, the shared vulnerability of authentic encounter, and the unwavering pursuit of inner truth. The convergence of these threads suggests a reevaluation of our spiritual compass, urging us to look beyond the readily apparent, the rituals we inherit, towards the more subtle yet potent currents of grace that flow through the unadorned landscapes of our lives. It is as if a veil has been lifted, revealing that the divine may not be a distant entity to be appeased within hallowed walls, but an immanent presence woven into the very tapestry of our being and our world. As we pivot towards our final reflection, the accumulated weight of these considerations points towards a singular, potent realization that the most sacred spaces are often those we create within ourselves through conscious ethical choices and unwavering compassion. The journey has illuminated a path where the external architecture of faith gives way to the internal architecture of the soul, where the search for God transforms into the practice of being divinely present in every facet of life. This shift in perspective, from seeking God out there to recognizing God in here, is not a renunciation of the transcendent, but a profound re-engagement with its immanent reality. The implications are far-reaching, suggesting that the most profound acts of devotion are not those performed within designated holy sites, but those enacted in the everyday, in the quiet moments of moral decision-making, in the courageous acts of love and forgiveness that ripple outward, transforming not only ourselves, but the world around us. The path forward, then, is not about finding a new church, but about becoming the church, a living testament to the divine presence that permeates all existence. This understanding, born from a deep introspection and a courageous questioning of established norms, prepares us for a final contemplation on the enduring power of a faith that is lived, rather than merely professed. Tolstoy's declaration, "God is not in churches," was never a dismissal of the sacred, but a fervent plea for its rediscovery in the unadorned spaces of human existence. It was a recognition that the divine, in its boundless and elusive nature, cannot be contained within walls of stone or dogma. Instead, it resides in the quiet revolutions of the heart, in the courage to question, and in the unwavering commitment to live a life of authentic love and ethical integrity. The journey through his disillusionment reveals that the most profound sanctuaries are not those built by human hands, but those cultivated within the soul spaces of introspection, empathy, and unwavering moral resolve. The true practice begins now in the conscious decision to seek the immanent, to find the eternal, not in prescribed rituals, but in the unscripted moments of genuine connection and compassionate action that define our shared humanity. To embrace this perspective is to understand that faith is not a destination, but a perpetual unfolding, a continuous dialogue between the self and the transcendent, played out in the arena of lived experience. The essence of Tolstoy's radical reorientation lies in this very shift, from a passive reception of inherited truths to an active creation of spiritual meaning through ethical engagement. It is a call to recognize that the divine presence, far from being absent from our lives, is deeply interwoven with the very fabric of our existence, waiting to be unveiled not through outward conformity, but through inward transformation. The churches we build within ourselves, through acts of kindness, moments of truth, and the persistent striving for a more just and loving world, are the true temples where the divine can be encountered, not as a distant deity, but as an intimate, guiding force. This understanding offers a potent lens through which to view our own spiritual paths. It encourages us to look beyond the performative aspects of faith and to delve into the substance of our convictions, asking whether our actions truly echo the principles we hold dear. Tolstoy's legacy is not one of negation, but of affirmation. Affirmation of the individual's capacity to connect with the divine directly through a life lived with intention, compassion, and an unyielding pursuit of truth. The challenge, then, is to carry this spirit forward, to become living embodiments of the sacred, finding God not in the hushed silence of empty pews, but in the vibrant, often messy, and always profound symphony of life itself. The true practice begins now in the quiet courage to seek, to question, and to love, transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary, and realizing that the most sacred spaces are the ones we inhabit with open hearts and awakened souls.